Imagine living in a nice neighborhood, only to realize your HOA president is watching your every move. I'm talking peeking through blinds, standing at the edge of my yard, even accidentally walking by at the weirdest times. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But when I started getting violation notices for things I never even did, I knew Karen had taken things way too far. So instead of getting mad, I decided to have some fun. I gave her a show she'd never forget. And by the time I was done, Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was the one who got reported. Before we dive into this insane story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Tailflow, and drop a comment if you've ever had to deal with a nosy HOA Karen. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Every time I walked outside, Karen was there, taking a casual stroll past my house, pretending to water her plants while staring directly at me, even standing at the edge of my property, hands on her hips, watching. It was creepy, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just one of those nosy neighbors. Then the violation notices started. One morning, I found a letter taped to my door. The notice said, "Your lawn has exceeded the HOA's acceptable length and must be cut within 48 hours to avoid a fine." I frowned. My lawn was freshly mowed. Karen, of course, was standing outside, pretending to check her mailbox while eyeing me. I decided to ignore it. But then, a few days later, another notice. Trash cans must be removed from the curb within 12 hours of pickup. This is your second warning. I stared at the letter. I took my trash cans in the night before, and then it hit me. Karen was watching me. She was writing fake violations just to mess with me. That's when I decided. If Karen wanted to spy on me, I was going to give her a show. I called up my buddy Mike, who lives a few houses down. "Dude," I said, grinning. "Want to mess with Karen?" He laughed. "What did she do this time?" I told him about the fake violations, the spying, the constant creeping around my house. He immediately agreed to help. And that's when we planned the ultimate prank. For the next week, Karen was about to witness the most bizarre rule-breaking nonsense she had ever seen. Karen thought she could watch my every move and get away with it. But if she wanted to spy on me so badly, I was going to give her the most confusing, frustrating, and violating show she had ever seen. I called up Mike and laid out the plan. Every day, we would stage the most ridiculous scenarios right in front of Karen's house, things that looked like obvious HOA violations, but weren't technically against any rules. The goal? To drive Karen absolutely insane. Karen had already written me up for my lawn, right? So I decided to take things up a notch. That morning, Mike and I dressed up in full landscaper outfits, matching vests, work gloves, the whole deal. We rolled fake turf over my lawn, covering my already perfectly cut grass. Then we started trimming the fake grass with safety scissors while blasting classical music. Karen? She was standing on her porch, clutching her phone. I could see the rage building. Sure enough, an hour later, I got another notice. Fake grass is not permitted under HOA guidelines. I laughed so hard I nearly fell over. Why? Because nowhere in the rulebook did it say anything about fake grass. Karen was making things up again. Karen had written me up for leaving my trash cans out too long. So naturally, I decided to make a whole art project out of them. Mike and I decorated my trash cans like they were part of a modern art exhibit. One was covered in LED lights. Another had googly eyes and a fake mustache. The third one had a tiny reserved parking sign on it. Then we stood next to them, nodding seriously like art critics. Karen? She was pacing on her porch, furious. Another notice came in within hours. Trash cans must be functional and not modified for aesthetic purposes. I almost choked from laughing. Again, nowhere in the rulebook did it say anything about decorating trash cans. Karen was spiraling. At this point, Karen was losing her mind. So for our final prank, we decided to really push her over the edge. Mike borrowed his cousin's pet chicken. We set up a tiny leash and harness on the chicken and walked it around a yard like a dog. Karen? She was watching from behind her blinds, eyes practically twitching. 15 minutes later, another notice. Farm animals are strictly prohibited within HOA property. I grinned, because guess what? HOA rules define farm animals as livestock raised for food. This was a pet chicken, Karen had just embarrassed herself again. And this time, she wasn't just going to look foolish. She was about to get reported. Karen had been spiraling for days. She had written me up for fake grass, which wasn't against the rules, decorated trash cans, which also wasn't against the rules, walking a pet chicken, which, according to HOA guidelines, was completely legal. And each time, she embarrassed herself trying to enforce non-existent rules. But instead of giving up, Karen did what every power-hungry HOA dictator does when they're losing. She snapped. That Friday, I got a notice. Mandatory HOA meeting. Urgent community matter. I knew exactly what this was about. Karen was about to try one last time to paint me as the neighborhood troublemaker. So naturally, I made sure to sit front and center. As soon as the meeting started, Karen jumped up, waving a folder full of violation notices. This homeowner, she said, pointing directly at me, has repeatedly disrespected our regulations and turned this community into a joke. The room was silent. Then Mrs. Thompson, the HOA president, adjusted her glasses. She sighed. Karen, what exactly are the violations? Karen slammed the folder down on the table. Fake grass. Decorated trash cans. A chicken. Someone in the back actually snorted. Mrs. Thompson flipped through the papers, reading them out loud. She frowned. Karen, I don't see anything in the HOA bylaws that prohibits artistic trash cans or artificial turf. Karen's face twitched. But it's disruptive. Another board member, Mr. Delgado, leaned forward. And the chicken? It's listed as a pet, not livestock. Karen's face turned red. She knew she was losing. But then, she made one final massive mistake. The very next morning, I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when I saw it. A cop car pulling up in front of my house. And standing right next to it, Karen. She was smirking like she had just won the lottery. The officer stepped out, walking toward me. Sir, he said, pulling out his notepad, we received a report about a livestock disturbance. I blinked. Then I looked at Karen. She was standing behind the officer, arms crossed, grinning like she had finally defeated me. I fought the urge to laugh. Officer, I said, motioning to my yard, this is a pet chicken. The HOA already ruled that it's allowed. The officer raised an eyebrow. So, it's not being raised for food? Exactly, I said. It's literally a pet. The officer sighed and turned to Karen. Ma'am, he said, sounding exhausted, this is not a police matter. Karen's smirk vanished. But unless you're reporting a real crime, he continued, please don't waste department resources. Karen looked like she was going to explode. But then the officer hit her with a final nail in the coffin. Actually, he said, flipping his notebook closed, you just admitted to making a false report. That's an offense. Karen's jaw dropped. Then, in front of half the neighborhood, the officer handed her a citation for misuse of emergency services. I nearly died laughing. Karen thought she could get me in trouble. Instead, she just got herself fined. And now, the entire HOA was officially done with her. Karen had officially hit rock bottom. She had filed fake violation notices, tried to make up new HOA rules, called the cops on me, and ended up getting fined herself. At this point, she wasn't just a bad HOA president. She was a walking disaster. And now, the HOA was finally ready to get rid of her for good. A week after Karen's humiliating run-in with the cops, I got another notice. Urgent HOA meeting, board member review. I knew exactly what this meant. Karen's days were numbered. When I walked into the community center, the room was packed. Homeowners who never showed up to meetings were suddenly in attendance. Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, looking furious. Mrs. Thompson, the HOA president, stood up. This meeting has been called, she said, clearing her throat, to review complaints filed against Karen for misuse of power. Karen immediately jumped up. This is a witch hunt. Mr. Delgado, another board member, raised a hand. Karen, he said calmly, we have multiple reports of you harassing homeowners, issuing fake violations, and even wasting police resources. Karen turned bright red. That's ridiculous. I was just enforcing community standards. Mrs. Thompson held up a folder. Karen, half of these violations aren't in the rule book. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then another homeowner stood up. I got fined for a messy yard because I left a rake out for 10 minutes. Another neighbor raised their hand. She tried to fine me for parking in my own driveway. And then Mike stood up. She literally stood outside my house for 30 minutes watching me cut my grass. The room erupted. Karen looked around, realizing for the first time that no one was on her side anymore. And then Mrs. Thompson said the magic words. All in favor of removing Karen from the HOA board. Hands shot up. It was unanimous. Karen had finally lost. Karen shot up from her chair. You can't do this, she shrieked. Mrs. Thompson sighed. Karen, the vote is final. Karen's face turned bright red. She looked around frantically, like she was expecting someone to back her up. But no one did. For once in her life, Karen had absolutely no power. You're all going to regret this, she screamed, storming toward the door. Then, right before she left, she turned and glared directly at me. This is your fault. I grinned. I know. Then she stormed out forever. With Karen gone, the neighborhood felt like a brand new place. The fake violations? Canceled. The creepy spying? Over. The HOA actually started focusing on real problems. And the best part? No more random toy letters taped to my door. Karen thought she could control everything. She thought she could make the rules up as she went. She thought she could win. But in the end, she lost everything. And the neighborhood? It finally got its peace back. With Karen finally gone, the neighborhood felt completely different. No more random fines. No more HOA dictatorship. No more power-hungry Karen lurking behind blinds. For the first time in years, the HOA was actually doing its job properly. And trust me, everyone noticed. After Karen was booted from the HOA, the board made some serious changes. Fake violation records erased. New rule: no single board member could issue fines without a second approval. HOA meetings now included a resident feedback session to prevent another Karen disaster. Mrs. Thompson, the new HOA president, even made an official announcement. The HOA is here to support the community, not harass it. And just like that, the nightmare was over. Even though Karen was gone, her legacy of nonsense lived on. I walked outside today and didn't get written up for breathing. Feels weird. Think we should install a Karen-free zone sign at the entrance? I'm just waiting for her to pop up in another neighborhood. One of my favorite moments. Mike threw a No More Karen barbecue party at the park, where people brought fake HOA violation notices as decorations, a tiny replica of my illegal pet chicken, and a piñata labeled Karen's Rulebook. It was glorious. Looking back, this entire insane situation taught me a few things. Some people just love power. Karen didn't care about rules, she cared about control. Always know the rules, because HOA Karens will make them up. If I hadn't checked the bylaws, Karen would have kept abusing the system. The best revenge is making someone look foolish, publicly. Once the entire neighborhood saw the truth, Karen crumbled. When a Karen moves out, peace moves in. The neighborhood became 1,000,000 times better without her. Karen thought she could control everything. She thought she could spy on people, make up rules, and find her way to dominance. But in the end, she lost her power, her reputation, and even her HOA position. And me? I got to watch Karen's entire empire crumble, one bad decision at a time. And trust me, that was the best show I've ever put on. And that, my friends, is how Karen's obsession with power completely backfired. What do you think? Have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen who thought she could watch your every move? Or worse, one who actually tried to fine you for things you didn't even do? Share your wildest HOA or neighborhood revenge stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video to keep HOA Karens in check. Subscribe to Tailflow for more insane HOA and revenge stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss another Karen takedown. Thanks for watching, and remember, if an HOA Karen ever spies on you, just make sure to give them a show they'll never forget. See you in the next one.